All right.
Yes, we're live.
We're live. The
Okay.
rest of your day.
I am going to start us off by introducing Thien-Kim. And let's hope I can do this without making a mistake. Thien-Kim writes stories about Vietnamese characters who smash stereotypes and find their happy endings. A recovering type Asian, she guzzles gafas sulada. I hope I did that right. Makes art and bakes her feelings to stay sane. Thien-Kim is also the founder of Body Bookworms, a subscription box that pairs sexy romances with erotic toys. She's been featured on NPR, BBC America, and NBC. Thien-Kim's debut romance, Happy Endings, will be released with Avon Books in May 2021. We're so excited. Take it away.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming here today. And I know there are a lot of events, so we're glad that you're here to hang out with us. Today we have some amazing panelists, but first I wanted to tell you more about Bookstore Romance Day in case you all are not familiar. So Bookstore Romance Day was created last year in 2019 as a way to create a love match between indie bookstores and the romance community. It's a classic enemies to lovers tale. For too long, indies were not embracing romances. And I have actually had this conversation with one of my indie stores in the area. But now with this initiative, we're on our way to our very own happily ever after. So thank you everyone for joining us. And remember to check bookstoreromanceday.com to give some love back and support our romance loving indie bookstores. All right, so now let's meet our authors. First up, I'm going to go alphabetically. First up, we have Alyssa Cole. Alyssa is an award-winning author of historical, contemporary, and sci-fi romance. Her contemporary rom-com, A Princess in Theory, was one of the New York Times 100 Notable Books of 2018. Her books have received critical acclaim from the Library Journal, BuzzFeed, Kirkus Booklist, Jezebel, Vulture, Book Riot, Entertainment Weekly, and various other outlets. When she's not working, she can be found watching anime or wrangling her mini pets. And crabs, right? Sneaking into your home.
There's only been the one crab, thank goodness. But it was terrifying, even though, you know, a creature that at some point, it's like I could just pick it up and boil it if I wanted to, but
you need more than one or it's not enough.
You walk into the hallway and just see, and the crabs here are really scary looking. They're land crabs, so they kind of have like a more menacing.
I didn't know there were land crabs. We also have award-winning author Sonali Dev, who writes Bollywood-style love stories that let her explore issues faced by women around the world while still indulging her faith in the happily ever after. Sonali lives in the Chicago suburbs with her very patient and often amused husband and two teens who demand both patience and humor and the world's most perfect dog. Now, your teens also got you on TikTok recently, right?
Oh dear, did you actually see that?
My teens would be so embarrassed.
Yeah, my daughter will show up, every so many days and say, Mom, come here, here's this dance, let's do this dance. And I'm like, so at first I was like, are we doing this on camera? Like, are people going to see it? But I mean, it's fun. But one time I posted it and it got so many views that she has stopped asking me since then. She's like, it's just creepy. Why do your followers want to see a 19-year-old dancing? And I'm like,
it means you're cool. That's all.
No, when she realized Mom might be bordering on cool, she withdrew the offer. So she was like, I'm cutting you off.
Today, we also have Jennifer Estep, who is a New York Times, USA Today, and international bestselling author who prowls the streets of her imagination in search of her next fantasy idea. In addition to Kill the Queen, Jennifer is also the author of The Elemental Assassin, Mythos Academy, Black Blade, and Big Time series. So glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Also, we have bestselling author Diana Quincy, who is an award-winning TV journalist who decides to make up her own stories where happy endings always guarantee one of us. Her books have been included on best of lists in Library Journal and the Washington Post. As a U.S. Foreign Service brat, Diana grew up all over the world, but is now happily settled in Virginia with her husband and two boys. When not bent over her laptop, Diana spends time with her family, reads, practices yoga and plots her next travel adventure. I have been plotting a lot of travel adventures right now.
Not lately.
We can't do anything else.
Luckily we got a trip in just before the pandemic started. So we're empty nesters. And so as soon as the boys went to college, we booked a trip to Europe. So at least we got a little of that before the pandemic started.
Oh, good. In the meantime, we'll just all travel in our homes through books. Right? Okay. So I'm going to jump right in with what could be an easy or a hard question. So what is the easiest and the hardest part about writing romance? And I'll just start with Alyssa. We'll go around, and then later everybody can jump in when they're ready. So Alyssa.
The easiest and hardest part. I think the easiest part for me is coming up with the couple and doing all the research and coming up with scenes and being like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then the hardest part is sitting down and writing it. And once I have all of these ideas, and then I'm like, oh, now I have to make them into a coherent thing. But for me, another thing too is kissing scenes I find to be particularly hard. Sex scenes are easier. Kissing scenes, because I hate the word tongue. I hate everything associated with this, and trying to make a kissing scene sound sexy while using, tongues and tangling and all of that. It's like, okay, so that's my hard part for writing romance.
The readers don't understand what the sacrifices we make for them. Sonali, what's the easiest and hardest part for you?
Goodness, I do love the word tongue very much. Given that it's all food and sex, so it's kissing and food, and you need your tongue for both those. So my characters do a lot of tasting. They taste with their whole bodies. They taste with their hearts. Anyway, so, and taste is a euphemism. But what do I will say that I don't know specifically about if this answers the question specifically about romance, but with writing, I absolutely hate writing the first draft. So it's like pulling teeth. It's like, birthing babies when they're full grown. Like, it's just this horrible process for me. So I kind of, begrudge every second that I have to create a new word. I mean, of course, I also kind of love it, but I hate it. Like, I'm extremely grumpy and horrible to be around when I'm writing the first draft. I think my favorite part is, when that first draft is out, which is essentially a really ugly, like I call it a vomit draft that has, and then I have to pick out the nuggets of the good stuff from the vomit, but at least it's all out there. And once it's out there, that whole time when your characters start living inside you and you're basically dreaming them all the time, and you're kind of, they're just alive in this way, inside you. And I think you can't sleep or any of that, which should be awful, but is wonderful. And I think I love that part. Once it's all real, and then it's just a matter of putting what's on my head, making it look like that on the page. So that first vomit has happened, all of that is done, and then you're just kind of, I have to keep saying vomit, which is not a word I like as much as tongue, but yeah, that's.
And Jennifer, what do you find easiest and hardest about writing romance?
I would say the easiest thing for me is just coming up with ideas. I have so many more ideas than I will ever have time to write. I'm kind of like, I guess it's the dog in the movie Up, and he's like, squirrel. And, it's kind of like how I feel about the shiny idea. Like, if I'm working on something, I immediately want to work on something else that, will be so much better than what I'm working on. I would say for me, it's not the hardest part, but like one of the most tedious parts is reading your own book again and again and again and again. I get so tired of like rereading through the drafts and then the copy edits and the page proofs. It's like, by the time I get to the page proofs, I am like, I never have to read this book again. And I'm so happy about that.
Diana?
Basically what they all said. I think the problem is, and also what Jennifer mentioned about going through all those drafts, by the time you've been through it 4 or 5 times, I'm pretty sure it's not very good. and it must be a terrible book, but it's too late and it goes out in the world once you've read it so much. I think it's, coming up with the idea, sort of plotting it with, my girlfriends or my critique partners. I enjoy the collaborative part of that, and it's a lot of fun. And the first 3 to 5 chapters usually just flow. But then, boy, after that, it's like, oh, what's going to happen next? So that sort of plotting that, like, you know what the last maybe third of the book is, because it's really, just closing everything up that you've wound up. But that middle, that like from 5 chapters to like the last third is the hardest part for me.
Okay, awesome. And now that we're talking about your process about writing romance, I wanted all of you to talk about, you all have new books that are coming out or just came out. So if you could just tell the audience about them, and we can get them to go to lovesweetarrow.com and buy a copy right away. So we'll start with Sonali.
Oh, okay. My handy dandy visual support. It's so Recipe for Persuasion just came out in May, and nobody would ever guess this about this book, but it's kind of a retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion, and it's actually my homage to her, and it is part of the series where Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors was the first one. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write stories that pay homage to my 4 favorite Jane Austen novels, and it's set in a politically ambitious Indian American family that's descended from royalty, as families often are, and their oldest son is running for California governor, and the 4 books are set starting from when they announced the candidacy to the election, and each one of them is one Jane Austen novel. Recipe for Persuasion, I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but Recipe for Persuasion is set on a Food Network show called Cooking with the Stars, which is like Dancing with the Stars, but with chefs and celebrities. And the protagonist is a chef who is kind of forced to go on there to save her restaurant. And of course, the celebrity she gets stuck with is the guy she dumped in high school under familial pressure. And he's gone on to become a World Cup winning football star, which is soccer here in America. And they're both quite angry, and they're both quite, determined not to fall in love, which always goes one way in romances. And so...
So delicious to watch them fall in love, right?
Yes, that's what it's about.
Jennifer?
Okay, my new book is Crush the King, and this came out in March of this year. It's the 3rd book in my Crown of Shards epic fantasy romance series. And basically the series is like Gladiator meets Game of Thrones with a kick-butt heroine. And I write in first person. So there's a lot of action, adventure, danger, and of course there is some romance, although mine is more of a slow burn over the course of the 3 books in the trilogy. But I just, I love coming up with the fantasy world and then, putting the romance in there and just like making the stakes and everything just like so epic and, life and death and all the good stuff that goes into a really great love story.
Awesome. And Diana? Your book?
My book, it's the first book in the series. It's called Her Night with the Duke. So you can imagine what happens. It's about a widow, a young widow. She's still in her 20s. When her husband dies, she goes traveling. She becomes a travel writer. She's coming back home after 2 years away. She gets stuck at an inn because of a rainstorm, as happens. And she meets a handsome stranger. They have one hot night together and agree they're going to go their separate ways. The next day, she gets to the estate of her deceased husband, where her stepdaughter lives, and she meets her stepdaughter's future husband, and it's the man that she spent the night with. So that's the setup.
It's a lot to untangle.
And the heroine is a divorced heroine. She is, it reflects my own background. She's half Middle Eastern. Her father is was a marquis, and her mother was the daughter, well, she's actually an Arab immigrant merchant. So, and it's set in Regency, England.
Awesome. And Alyssa.
My book coming out on September. Oh no, I have my background up. You can't see it. It's a thriller called When No One Is Watching, and it's my debut thriller. It is a social thriller, a gentrification thriller. It's about a woman who moves back to her neighborhood after getting a divorce, and she's just really looking for the comfort of home, but everything has changed and is changing before her eyes. She's not sure what she's imagining or what is real. She has also decided to make a walking tour of her neighborhood in Brooklyn to kind of hold on to the history or find the forgotten history. And one of the new neighbors, oh, thank you, Diana.
I'm dying to, hold on. I'm dying to read this book, by the way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great cover.
So her neighbor across the street, Theo, who is one of the new neighbors, volunteers to help her with the tour. And as they are researching and find things are starting to get even more shady in the neighborhood, they start to discover that history is maybe repeating itself, and maybe everyone isn't just moving to the suburbs. So it's a thriller. It's pretty anxiety inducing from what many people have told, but it's like a thriller with romantic elements because obviously I couldn't leave people hanging with that. But yeah, so that's out September 1st.
All right, so make sure you buy those books from your indie bookstore like Love Sweet Arrow. So I have a lot of questions coming in from the audience. I'm going to make the audience wait. I'm going to tease them a little bit more. So I have a question that I want to ask our authors, and then we'll get to, there's some really good questions coming in. Okay, so now you are all from different backgrounds, and you all write in different genres, subgenres. And so how has your background, like where you live, your culture, your upbringing influenced your books? And you know, like if whether it's like how you write them or what makes it into your book, I'd love to know. We'll start with Jennifer.
Give me the hard question to answer first. Well, I would say, you know, I'm from the South. So with one of my fantasy series, my Elemental Assassin urban fantasy series, it's set in the South and it's very dark and gritty and Southern. And the premise is it's about an assassin who runs a barbecue restaurant, which was the most Southern thing that I could think of to write about. So in that book, you know, growing up in the South is definitely reflected in that book. And I've set some of my other books in the South and, you know, North Carolina and other places. But I would say that the Elemental Assassin series is the one that really, you know, reflects my upground and my backgrounding, you know, more so than like the one set in a, you know, like a complete fantasy kingdom. So yeah, it's always interesting. I will say something that has come up in my books that I never thought about. In the South, we use the word toboggan, and it means a winter hat in the South. And I have literally gotten, I would say probably more than 100 emails from people in Canada.
Because
Yes, who want me to use the word toque, and I hope I'm saying that right, because that is a winter hat like in the northern US and in Canada, and a toboggan is a sled. And I have, so many people have asked me this. I've literally put it on the frequently asked questions page of my website that no, toboggan in the South is a hat. Please stop asking me this question. It is literally the bane of my existence. So sometimes your background can be good and sometimes it can lead to something like that.
That should be your new bookmark.
I feel like I could give a TED talk about toboggan versus toque now. I mean, seriously.
you should.
And Diana, how's your background shown up in your books?
Well, up until this series, I've written all white characters. I, you know, kind of thought, certainly that's what you normally see in romance. And I really sort of thought that to sell, that's what I had to write. And it, you know, didn't even occur to me when I first started to write, characters of color. I also write a romantic mystery series. And in that series, it's the Atlas Catesby Mysteries. In that series, the hero is a world traveler. I grew up as a U.S. Foreign Service brat. We were all over the world. So in that way, I sort of put that in my hero. So I think in that way it reflected. In this book, I would say this book is probably the one that most closely resembles, that it has more of me and my culture growing up. So there are certain Arabic words in there. There are certain things about Arabic culture, hospitality, being very welcoming, that are in that book. And so that's how it was kind of strange to sort of introduce that. I had not written about that. You don't see a lot of that in the literary canon and the culture. You see a lot of negativity about Arabs in the culture. So it was fun to sort of introduced this kind of different side. And so far it seems to be well received, and that's been very exciting for me.
Wonderful. I think it's good to have voices books out so people can learn from your background. Alyssa.
Yeah. So I put a lot of my background into my books. I grew up in the Bronx and Jersey City, and literally all of my friends and the people were around me were from all different cultures. I'm Black American, but my dad is Caribbean British, so half of my family is Caribbean British. I grew up in America, more firmly with my American side. I live in the Caribbean now, totally unrelated to my family, but just by like weird coincidence. But the areas where I grew up in were really just so many people from different areas. Like all of my friends at school came from different backgrounds. So even just, going to a friend's house after school was an introduction to another culture, what your friends were bringing for lunch or what they were talking about or what they were reading. So it wasn't like a conscious thing. It was kind of just there in the background. And that's something that I'm always grateful for, because it, in a way, helped me to, when I was reading and starting to read books that I enjoyed and would be like, none of these people look like me or my friends or my family. That kind of set my, I guess, mission early to make books with people that look like me and my friends and my family. So yeah, I guess that's how it gets reflected. Like sometimes people are like, oh, are you like choosing these, specific things? And it's like, well, that's just the world that I grew up in. So it's not particularly, it's conscious on one level, but on another, it's just reflecting reality that I grew up in.
And your readers love it. Sonali?
So my books are set in the Indian culture and in the Indian American culture. And, because what else stories would I write, right? They naturally are the stories I've always wanted to tell. I understand what Diana was saying, and there was there was a little bit of the, can you turn, what if your character is white? What kind of narrative that came at me when I first, was presumptuous enough to think someone was going to publish me. And it was not even an option, in my conscious mind. And I think that was because I was fortunate enough to for that timing to be where it was. And maybe 5 years before that or 10 years before that, that would be a distant dream. But so absolutely, not only are my stories set in the Indian culture, they are stories about families who don't understand the concept of privacy at all, which is, an ode to my mother. If I say, Mom, I need some space, my mom's famous line is, but you're my daughter. I'm like, oh, so she doesn't even compute, the idea of space. So that kind of is the, the Indian family I come from. And so it is just such a great hotbed for stories, right? I mean, people who don't understand boundaries are always story gold. The sheer quantity of expectation that you carry, and that's very much a real conflict in my life. This constant tightrope walk between, personal identity and personal freedom and community expectation. And some of it is just downright wrong. Some of it is wonderful, but you have to make your way around it. So I think a lot of that, natural, like things that bother me or things that hold me up in my own life naturally translate into my stories, because I'm specifically always trying to explore something. Something that either bothered me when I was growing up, or something that I don't see in the world around me that I had, that I do have in my life. So there's always this me against the world and me with the world thing that's happening, that, that naturally my lens is what it is. And which is, again, no culture is a monolith. Indian culture certainly is not a monolith. It's kind of almost as unmonolithic as any culture could be. It's an entire world, mushed into one country. And I think that that's another thing that's in my stories. They're very specific to whatever that character is, rather than a representation of, the Indian culture. So it's a lot of that. And I think there's a lot of having to wanting to kind of reverse the traditional narrative. It's, flipping stuff again that has bothered you about what you've seen in books, like Alyssa and was saying, is, my children grew up with no brown people in their books growing up, in this country. And I think that's just something they can never get back. That's gone, that experience, and whatever that does to your growing. Not that, it's, and everybody works around things, but I don't want my grandchildren to have that same experience. And so I do think that, that the fact that more and more our own voices are getting a chance to see story form is just huge.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to circle back to, how you said that no culture is a monolith. And the more authors of each race or culture can write their own stories, other readers can see that firsthand and not assume what we've all been taught or shown in the media. And I really appreciate trailblazers like you all that has allowed me to write, unapologetically Vietnamese characters. So thanks. Okay, this is a great reader question. I think it fits into what we were talking about taste and tongue earlier. Sorry, Alyssa. What cocktail would your latest heroine drink? Anybody, whenever you're ready, can jump in.
Sydney, and when no one is watching, enjoys drinking wine by herself because she's going through it. And also occasionally will bust out the bottle of whiskey. So
is she a box wine kind of lady, or like a bottle of wine kind of person?
She's getting some bottles of wine from the bodega, but she wouldn't be opposed to a box of wine if
I'm just asking for myself because I drink box of wine.
Yeah, she wouldn't be opposed to it. Some box of wine is good. And the little like wine juice boxes.
Yeah.
Wine juice boxes. Yum. I recently discovered when my daughter had some leftover smoothies that if you pour some red wine into leftover smoothie, you have a sangria. The things you learn from your children. But yeah, I didn't mean to jump in, Alyssa. I don't know if you.
Oh no, I was good.
Would your heroine drink that sangria?
So Ashna, actually, from Recipe for Persuasion, has a history with alcohol because her father was quite severely alcoholic, and so she actually watches how much she drinks because she's kind of terrified of it. So she has this whole, she drinks one glass of wine because if she doesn't drink at all, people ask her too many questions, and if she drinks more than that, then she's kind of afraid. But she is obsessed with tea. So if she were to, and she is obsessed with with feelings and moods that tea evoke in people. And so if she were to create a cocktail, given that she's a chef and obsessed with tea, I think it would be something that has, and she also does not like when people call random brews tea. It has to have the tea leaf in it.
So no chai tea, right?
It has to actually, like, tea should have tea in it. This might be a private rant that I have kind of fired off of her shoulder. but she would probably come up with a cocktail that has some sort of tea blend in it and ginger maybe. So
Oh,
a
maybe
Moscow
maybe one of your
Mule.
readers can come up with a cocktail for her.
Yeah.
Diana?
Maybe, I mean, she's a Regency gal, so in the book she drinks port. But maybe if she was going to get a little crazy, there's a Middle Eastern liquor called Arak. So maybe she'd have something mixed with that, and olives are very central and figs are very central. So, maybe something that's got, some figs or olives in it. I don't know.
Yum.
Jennifer?
Well, it's so funny that we've been talking about sangria because that's what my character drinks in Crush the King. She's like kind of looking out over her kingdom and drinking sangria and like plotting how to kill off all of her enemies. So I thought that would be a good drink for that. Something light and fruity, when you're contemplating murder. So
As you do.
as you do in a fantasy book.
Sangria is a good murder drink.
I personally love sangria. Like, I'm all about the drinks where you can't actually taste the alcohol. So I love like a good fruity sangria.
Do like a good sangria. Okay, I'm going to jump into some audience questions. Okay, somebody, I don't have names. Sorry, everyone watching. I don't know who asked what, but do you ever go back and reread a book after it's been published?
I do. I do, and it's really weird. Usually I'll kind of get in there to look for something. Like if I'm going to do an event and someone has asked for, you to read. Like today, before this, I did something and they wanted a little piece of something that shows how, the hotness level of your book. And so if I go searching for things, I end up reading much more, which I always take as a good sign because it's like I can, I won't stop at that, and I'm like, this is probably so. I do also when you're writing a series, and if you're stupid enough not to maintain a series Bible, then sometimes you have to kind of wade back in there to find out what someone's height was or the color, what shade of brown the color of their eyes was, given that it's Indian characters and it's always brown. But I have no idea how people who write white characters keep the eye colors and the hair colors straight.
I read my books sometimes after, some time has passed. And I think it's a holdover from when I was a kid, when I first started writing stories. I was writing them for me because I wanted to read very specific things that I wasn't seeing in books. I would write a story and then I would read it. Then I would read it a few weeks later. I don't read it, like I don't have time to read my books all the time now, but I do sometimes go back and read. Sometimes it is like going to look for something and then being like, oh, okay, I'm gonna read this. But it's funny because it's like Diana said, at a certain point, the book, as you're working on it, becomes this thing. And like Jennifer said, you hate rereading it. You never want to see it again. It seems like it's garbage after you look at the same words like how many times. So for me, it's like kind of nice when I'm like, oh, okay, kind of turning off the typo, looking for typos and all of that, and kind of pretending like just going to distance myself from the business aspect of this and being like, oh no, can I change this in the draft, and just kind of like skimming past anything I would want to change and trying to enjoy the story. Because sometimes too, like you said, when you're writing a series, I also want to go back and see what I wrote before, and also like what emotional stuff I was writing in addition to the things that I didn't put in a story Bible like I should have been doing, like Sonali said.
Yeah, I think readers see the final draft, like the published book, and it's so clean and beautiful, and they don't realize how often authors reread their books. Oh, a lot.
It is not clean and beautiful. Vomit is not clean and beautiful.
I have 12 books, I think, and I've never reread a single one of them. I have no desire to read, and I like to think it's because I hope I get better with each book. And I think if I went back to those first or second books, I would be like, oh my God, so wordy. And I of course, I don't keep a Bible like I should. So I do have to go back and, with books in a series, and just to make sure I don't reuse names or, but other than that, no. I do listen to them on tape though. I do like to listen. For me, I sort of put that book to bed permanently for me once I listen to the audio, and then that's like my goodbye to the book, and I'm done with it at that point.
You know what's so funny? I feel like I have not listened to any of my books on audio because I feel like that would be too. I'd be like, oh no, like someone else is reading.
I'm exactly like that. I'm the opposite from you, Diana. I mean, because they sound like the characters in your head, and they sound like you in your head, and there's almost, I mean, the person who reads my book, Sonila, she does a great job, but I still feel a little violated, like to get into that whole, I'm like, oh.
It's not that for me. It's like, it feels more real hearing someone else read it. Like, oh no, this is something that I wrote. Like when I'm just like picking it up and like, okay, I'm going to sneak read a little bit here. It's kind of the same as like just reading a story that I wrote. But when it's like a real narrator, it's like, oh wait, this is a real thing. And if I hear something that I don't like, I'm going to feel really.
Well, I mean, it does, like lots of times I think, oh, I should have taken out that word, or that's too wordy. Yeah. But for me, listening to audiobooks of mine is a treat. It's like it came alive.
Yeah.
And I have all those issues too about the writing. And in one of the books, I love the narrator, but I hate the way he voices the hero. So, but otherwise I do enjoy it, but I have all those pitfalls.
I will say I did listen to the Audible original I did just because the point of it was to be in audio, and it came out, but in that I was like able to just kind of like pretend someone else had written it and just listen to the voices.
Alyssa, was it a little bit different to write something that was on audio first, like process-wise?
It was, because I tried to think of it kind of like, I mean, parts of it are just first-person narration, but some parts are kind of like scripted, and I tried to think of like sound effects and things that could be added throughout to evoke certain things. Like there's a part where it's about a robot, an AI, and like when he's talking, I wanted it to sound like dial-up internet, like before he gets his language, but I think it came out sounding not like that. Another computer noise that was great. The production team did a great job, but like in my head, I just thought it would be funny for people of a certain age to hear the internet dial-up sounds. But other people would have no idea at all what they were, I think. So.
I tried to explain that sound to my kids.
Yeah, my kids.
They were horrified when I played it for them. Okay, so we're getting some great audience questions. So if you have more, definitely put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. Okay, so is there a genre that you want to write and that you haven't yet? This might be harder for you, Alyssa.
I want to write a thriller.
Do it.
I actually, if I had not sold this series to Avon, I have a thriller. I've sort of plotted it out. It does have Arab American characters, so I thought that would be fun. And I still hope to write it one day.
I think you should. I'm gonna not talk for too long, but like people like during the tour for this thriller or interviews, not tour, at home tour, but people often are asking like, oh, is it like way harder writing a thriller? And I'm like, no, this is natural to romance writers. Like we write mysteries about love. It's just changing what the point of the mystery is. So I think, and I mean, Helen K. Damon is writing one, has one coming out. Nalini Singh has written one. Vicky, I think it's a good crossover. It has
I agree,
some thrills, some suspense, and some romance.
I actually want to write a rom-com because most of my books are fantasy, superheroes and assassins and things like that. So I'm like, when I'm writing one of my books, I don't read a fantasy book. I will read a contemporary romance or a rom-com or something light or fun like that. And I'm like totally addicted to the Christmas rom-coms. I mean, like I watch them all. Like if you ever have a question, like what Hallmark movie was that, you know, where the guy and they did the thing, it's like, just email me because I know, seriously. So I'm kind of hoping maybe if I take a break, you know, over the holidays this year, that I want to write a rom-com, and I want to make it like every single trope that I like all in one book, like enemies to lovers and royalty and a fake relationship, and just like put it all in there. And that's what I want to do.
I'm in. What about you, Sonali? Any other genres you want to write in? If you have the time, you know, all that other stuff.
I think I really, general fiction would be it, because I like stories that can just be stories, like that you kind of don't have to follow a certain kind of structure. Like the romance structure is now inbuilt, but I kind of, you know, just want to write a story about people, you know, that I don't have to. In fact, I don't want to put it in a slot. Like I just want to write stuff, you know.
You want to kill them at the end.
Well, then it's like literary fiction and everybody dies and it's depressing.
Or maybe I want to write literary fiction in which people actually learn how to be happy, and that's kind of the point of it, since that's the point of life, and literary fiction is supposed to be about life. So yeah, I mean, that thing I can say for sure, that I will never write a book in which the protagonist dies. I mean, I loathe anyone who does that. I'm sorry.
I did it. I was joking. I know you wouldn't do that.
I know, it's literally like, and there's been books that will remain unnamed that I started out having absolutely no idea this was going to happen. And I want to actually hunt down every person who asked me to read that book and like murder them. Like, you deserve to die for making me go through this. But yeah.
All right. So we'll see that in like 10 years after you've written all your, you know, your current list of books to write. Do you ever put Easter eggs in your books? And can you share one for people to look for when they're reading?
I have a good one. Should I go first?
Yeah.
So in Pride, Prejudice and Other, so out of the blue during quarantine, I got a text which gets buried, you know, in the whole Facebook messages, other folder or something like that. And I don't know why I was in there, but I get this message from this reader saying, you know, I'm going to sound completely crazy, and I promise you I'm not a crazy person, but I read in your book, you know, there's an English teacher. So Darcy, DJ, in Pride, Prejudice and Other Flavors had, you know, it's this fleeting mention of his English teacher. And I think it has to do with something about if he said something a certain way, he can never do it because he has Mrs. Brendish sitting on his shoulder. And that's all it was. And she's like, it's really strange to have a teacher named Mrs. Brendish. You know, that's awfully specific. Did you go to, and the school I went to in India, my school's name was Bombay Scottish School. And so we called it BSS. She said, did you by any chance go to Bombay Scottish? And because I'm sure there's no other school that has an English teacher named Mrs. Brendish. And it was, I think, one of the most amazingly joyous moments to get that, you know, that message. And I was like, oh my God, someone, you know. And when I was writing it, it was almost subconscious. It was, again, just my homage to Mrs. Brendish, who I would not, you know, I would not love reading or writing as much as I do without her. And I would also not be as terrified of bad grammar as I am because of her. But so it was just so lovely to have somebody. And then it turns out she was actually my year, my same graduating class. And, you know, I knew her, and she's in Chicago. And so once COVID has passed, we're going to meet, and we've been in touch.
That's amazing.
It's really cool. That's very cool.
It was so fun.
I didn't really know what it meant, the question. So I had to ask around. But I do have a coworker messaged me on a former coworker, I haven't worked with him in over 10 years, messaged me to tell me how much his wife enjoyed my books, how she'd read all of them. And he came to my office and, with my book so I could sign it for her as a special gift. So they had a baby. So I did name a character, a side character, because I can't have their daughter in sexual situations. So I did name a side character after their daughter, and then they have a son who's only the daughter is a year old, and the baby, her brother is 4 years old. So I thought, do I have to? So I named a character after the boy, after the brother too. So, and then for my my BFF who reads all my books, who critiques all my books, she has this thing with birds. She loves bird fabrics. If it's got a bird on it, she loves it. So I did have in the book I'm writing now, the character's mother loves birds, and little ceramic birds, and so those little things, not necessarily for readers, I guess, but for people who I know.
I have a lot of Easter eggs in my books between the different fantasy series. Like in the superhero series that I wrote, there's a fashion designer. So in all the other series, everybody wears a suit by this fashion designer. And, it's really just fun for me to figure out where to put the Easter eggs in the books. And then in Kill the Queen, the first Crown of Shards book, my heroine has a lot of cousins because she's part of this big royal family. So what I did was I took the character names from most of my other books and made them all her cousin names. And then I killed them all off in the first couple of chapters. And it's been interesting to have readers email me and say I love that you used the names, but then you killed everybody off.
I put a lot in my books, some personal, a lot of pop culture ones. I think one that I enjoy is in the Reluctant Royal series, in A Prince on Paper, at the royal wedding, Johann has a conversation with the diplomat from Zamunda, which is the royal country in the movie Coming to America. So just kind of throwing in those little, homage to things that readers will enjoy if they also enjoyed the Reluctant Royal series. And my childhood self enjoyed, obviously.
So when you're reading their books, definitely look out for those things. All right, so we're almost done, but I have one question that we to close out. So I know that you're all big readers, obviously. So can you recommend a book or an author that you're absolutely loving and you think that we should read?
I can start. I just read a book. It's coming out September 15th. It is called, I didn't just read it. I read it a few months ago, but have been obsessed with it. It's YA fantasy, contemporary fantasy, and it's called Legend Born by Tracy Deonn. It's so good. It's modern Arthurian fantasy, set in the South, in a college in the South. The heroine is a young Black woman who is trying to find answers about her mom. So it mixes Arthurian legend plus Southern history. There's romance, and it's really, really good. And I'm just really kind of mad that it's not even out yet. And I don't even get to read, I don't know when book 2 is going to come out. And I'm upset about this. So Legend Born by Tracy Deonn. And I'll also recommend quickly, this week I finished The Hitman by Katrina Jackson, which is kind of an erotic romance with a hot Italian hitman, and a woman who her movie star fiance cheats on her the night before her wedding with her best friend, and it blows up on the news. She goes on their honeymoon to Italy. She's crying all the time. The hitman next door, who is just trying to have a vacation, is really not happy about this. And then they kind of get drawn together. So it's kind of I guess, erotic romantic suspense, but it's really, really good because he's a killer, but also sweet. So I guess I guess I haven't watched 365 DNI, but I feel if people enjoyed that but want it without kidnapping and with consent and like none of the creepy parts of that movie. I might be wrong. I didn't watch it. Sorry.
You're not wrong.
I haven't seen it.
You're not wrong.
I haven't seen it either.
Whatever the case, but even if whether you've seen it or not, I would recommend it if you like romantic suspense and hot Italian hitman.
Well, I'm not reading anything super current. I'm reading a mystery series that I'm currently obsessed with. That's everyone else in the world has already discovered it, I think. It's the Armand Gamache series by Penny. Now her head just went out of her name just went out of my head, but it's an amazing series. She's got like 12 books in the series. I'm eating them all up, and it's just beautifully written. It's almost, you feel like you're reading literary fiction, but it's a mystery series. I highly recommend it, and I'm going to look up the last name while somebody else talks because it just went out.
Is the author Canadian?
Yes.
Is it Asmazena Khan?
No.
Okay.
No.
She has a different mystery series.
Yeah. Well, somebody else talk.
Okay.
Jennifer, you about this. Oh, there you go.
I have props. So I have been reading the Consortium Rebellion series by Jesse Mahalik. I hope I'm saying your last name right, Jesse. And it's like sci-fi romance with these really like kick butt heroines. It's really, really good. And then I also have finished The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. Which and fun. Do you have that one too? And then I also have a bunch of more rom-coms on my TBR pile. I have If I Never Met You, I think by Mahari McFarlane. I hope I'm saying her name right. And gosh, a ton of other stuff. But Alyssa's thing about the hot Italian hitman, I don't know if anybody has watched Cursed on Netflix yet, but there is a monk on there. And all he does is go around and kill people. And it is like the hottest thing ever. So if you want a hot fantasy monk, go watch Cursed on Netflix.
That is the best recommendation I've seen for that show.
The name is Penny, and the book I'm most eager to read that hasn't come out yet is Alyssa's book. I am gonna buy that book and I'm gonna read it as soon as it comes out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna do one better and say, Alyssa, please send me the arc before it comes out. I've been waiting for it.
We've actually had volunteers in the audience to volunteer to read arcs for Alyssa. So.
I'm always here volunteering ahead of them. So I think I just started. So this book comes out on Tuesday. It is Nisha Sharma's Legal Affair. So I haven't read it yet. I just started it, but I'm really excited about it because you know how we were talking about, you know, no culture being a monolith. And there's just this particular kind of point of view that's very Bollywood, very romance, you know, traditional high hit romance with like traditional Bollywood, that perspective that Nisha mixes in her books that I just love. And another one that I really enjoyed was Trouble with Hating You, Sajni Patel. And again, that whole not a monolith thing, it's a very specific niche of the Indian culture in America. So it is Texan, Gujarati American, and this little pocket of a very specific kind of, you know, Indian American bubble that I have, you know, that feels very, very different from my life experience, but that felt very authentic. And the romance side of it is just is fabulous because you know, it has this complete badass heroine who is there is a little bit of, you know, self-loathing, but not about being Indian, but about the experiences she's had with this culture. And I just love you know, how they just find each other. And of course, it starts out with an arranged marriage trope, which again is usually, you know, a trigger for me when I'm like, oh, but then it's really hard to find new Indian novels in America that don't have something to do with the parents pressuring children to get married trope. But having said that, you know, I mean, there's been a lot of recent Indian and Indian American authors who've tried to make it fresh and lovely because that seems to be the only thing that's demanded. You know, the publishing industry seems to be like, please give us one more story with how either the clock is ticking or something is happening and your parents are really worried about you getting married, I'm here to tell you that Indian parents do have other concerns, and that's not the only thing they worry about. But the authors who are working on that trope are doing really well. Sajni's book is great. Sara Desai's book is fabulous. So, we take what we can get and then subvert it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm listening to, if you listen to audiobooks, I highly recommend the audiobook version of The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. It's probably going to be one of my favorite audiobooks of this year. It's very different from her past books, but it's absolutely brilliant. And there's sound effects in it. So I was driving and there's a chase scene, and you can hear the horns, and I'm like in my car, like looking around, like where's that horn coming from? I'll highly recommend it. All right. Well, it's been such a lovely time to talk to you, and I want to remind our viewers to go to Love Sweet Arrow and buy a copy of our authors' books. And if you ask, then I'm sure that they can include signed book plates for your book, so you can get signed books. Thank you again for joining us on one of the many amazing panels for Bookstore Romance Day. Definitely go to their website, bookstoreromanceday.com, and check out the other events and support your indie bookstore. And we'll see you soon, and hopefully we'll see some of you in person for book events in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.